and welcome to the League of Women Voters Wilkes-Barre's candidate forum for the 120th District. Please silence all your cell phones and other like devices. Thanks to the Wyoming Seminary for the use of this venue, the Buckingham Performing Arts Center, and thanks to Representative Phyllis Mundy and Mr. Aaron Kaufer for agreeing to participate in our event this evening. Each candidate shall be given a minute and a half to introduce themselves to the audience. The order of the candidates, the order in which the candidates will speak has been determined by drawing numbers, and Ms. Mundy will begin with her opening statement in a moment. Each candidate will be given a minute and a half for a closing statement at the end of the forum. All questions will be asked of each candidate, who will be given a minute and a half period to respond to each question. Questions will be accepted from the audience, but we ask that those questions must be in writing, and they will be collected by League representatives and will be asked by me, the League moderator. We will ask questions as time permits. By the way, I'm Michelle Anthony. I'm on the board of the League of Women Voters, and I live in Wilkes-Barre, so I have no horse in this race. Questions should be addressed to both candidates and should be limited to one subject only. And the League asks that you would hold your applause until the end of this forum at around 8 o'clock. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. Candidates are asked not to use the League name or specific information from this forum in campaign ads or for campaign purposes. Thank you. So with that, we'll begin. Ms. Mundy will begin with her opening statement.
Thank you, Michelle. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the League and Wyoming Seminary for sponsoring this event and for hosting us here tonight. Elections have consequences at all levels of government, and all elections affect our everyday lives. I believe that Governor Corbett is taking us in the wrong direction by allowing our roads and bridges to crumble, giving the wealthiest multi-state, multinational corporations huge tax breaks not tied to job creation, cutting $1 billion from public education, raising our property taxes. He and the current majority that supports his agenda have turned their backs on the average, hardworking, middle-class Pennsylvanian. I have fought to bring reason and common sense to our economic policies, our state budget, and to raise up the middle class. I have fought for tax fairness, to close corporate tax loopholes and ask wealthy corporations to pay their fair share. I have fought for reasonable severance tax and greater environmental protections as the gas industry drills in the Marcellus Shale. I have been a voice and an advocate for the average, hardworking, middle-class citizen. I look forward tonight to an honest and open discussion of the issues facing Pennsylvania and what my opponent plans to do about them.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, Wyoming Seminary, Representative Mundy, but most of all, you, the voters. I'm here to talk about you, about the hardworking people of the 120th District, full of hardworking, genuine, patriotic Americans who deserve a rep with the energy, passion, and independence needed to represent the 120th District. We need a rep to listen to the people and a leader in finding solutions. Since announcing my campaign, I've knocked on over 15,000 doors. And I've led by stepping up and putting forward a plan called PA First, a comprehensive 12-point plan based on your ideas. It's about government reform and ending the partisan stalemate, bringing the money back from the casino revenues that we were promised, reducing government bureaucracy, about tax reform and property tax elimination, a severance tax on gas drillers, and legislative perk reform, an issue of principle that our legislators have failed to seriously address, but most importantly, economic policy, to create jobs here in northeastern Pennsylvania. We have the highest unemployment rate in this labor market, and it's unacceptable. We are the worst for mature business and next to worst for new business. That doesn't create jobs. So tonight, I hope to have a discussion about the important issues facing the people of the 120th District. Our future is not about Representative Mundy. It's not about me. It's about you. And tonight, I will show you that I'm the person to represent you.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufer. On to our first question for both candidates. Mr. Kaufer, I'll ask, you'll be addressing this question first. With nearly $1 billion in education funding cut from Pennsylvania's budget, local school districts are reducing or eliminating student programs at the same time that academic expectations are increasing. Parents, teachers, and students already know there is a state funding crisis. Do you feel there is a crisis? And will you, as part of the legislature, make this education funding crisis a top priority?
Absolutely. My mother is a retired teacher. She's here in the audience. I want to thank her for being here. She's a retired teacher after 37 years in public education. It's an issue that I care very deeply about, and an issue that she brought forward actually to this area. Some of these specifics being the reading rally that happens at Wyoming Valley West. Who's never here in this area before my mother. But more importantly, the person I work with on education is Erin Keating. She's the Wyoming Valley West principal of our high school. She's somebody I hold in very high regard, and so do many teachers. And one of the most important things that her and I have discussed is early childhood education, making sure that the money's there for the children. But most importantly is the funding that we talked about. And by working to reform the way we pay our property taxes, most importantly through eliminating our school property taxes, and having an equitable system. I know that a plan was put forward that came $1.5 billion short. We want to work for solutions, make sure we do have equitable funding for the long term. And that's something that I'm fully focused on, and something that's going to take a tweak in the numbers in order to get it right. Education is highly critical. It's our future. And this isn't the place where we need to be cutting right now. But also the money that Representative Mundy referenced already was federal stimulus money that we got from our federal government. We actually have more money in our education system than we ever have. And it's because we don't have that federal money that we can't guarantee coming from President Obama every year.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufer. Ms. Mundy?
A budget is a list of priorities. Don't tell me what your values are. Show me what your budget says, and I'll tell you what your values are. Cutting public education funding is a very short-sighted approach to economic growth. Without a highly skilled and well-qualified workforce to meet the needs and the jobs of the 21st century, we will be a third-rate country and a third-rate state. The Governor Corbett budget cuts, and I take issue with the notion that this was all federal money. It was not. Cuts to early childhood education, cuts to tutoring for at-risk students. These cuts are short-sighted, and we need to restore those funds in the state budget.
Thank you, Ms. Mundy. The next question I'll ask Ms. Mundy to answer first. This question is related to our first one. Governor Corbett and the Republican majority in Harrisburg are proposing a tuition voucher program as part of his school reform proposal. Are you in favor of tuition vouchers for private, parochial, even charter schools?
Charter schools in Pennsylvania are public schools. And I did support the bill that created charter schools, although I have serious concerns about how they're funded, and I have serious concerns about the fraud that we're seeing as some of the CEOs, the private entrepreneurs who've started charters, are taking home millions of taxpayer dollars. That's unacceptable and needs to be fixed. I oppose tuition vouchers for private and parochial schools. I have constitutional, philosophical, and fiscal problems with diverting tax dollars from public education to private and parochial schools.
Thank you, Ms. Mundy. Mr. Kaufer?
We have to put our priorities in order. And before we begin talking about moving to a school voucher system of any sort, we have to talk about the 900-pound gorilla in the room, and it's our pension crisis. Over the past several years, it's grown to be an estimated $65 billion issue. That's more than twice our state budget of $27 billion. So talking about diverting money out of education right now is unacceptable and irresponsible. So the best way about going about this, and there has been plans put forward to help work on addressing our pension crisis, including one by Representative Warren Kemp, which went to the Finance Committee. Talked about switching over a defined benefit to a defined contribution, giving people the option of whether they want to switch over. For people who would like to switch over, it would increase the contribution rate from 4% to 7% for employer matches. And this is the real issue that we need to talk about in our education system, about how we're going to get our pension crisis under control, because it's growing and escalating, and we haven't had solutions on it as of yet.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufer. One more school question. Should real estate property tax laws be revised, and if so, how, Mr. Kaufer?
I absolutely support the elimination of school property taxes. It's an issue that affects our seniors and young people, most important. It's a more equitable way of funding our education system. And one of the bills that was put forward that was a framework was House Bill 1776, which funds our education system by more equitably through a sales tax and earned income tax increase. The Independent Fiscal Office came forward saying that this was $1.5 billion short. There's a number of solutions in addressing this, including the Amazon loophole and tweaking the numbers that are associated with it. But most importantly, this is good for our economy. If we're going to stabilize our housing prices, it's by keeping seniors in their homes and helping young people buy their own homes. We have to build the equity in our homes. And we don't need a double mortgage to pay our own separate mortgage, plus a whole separate school property tax along with it. It's an outdated system that dates back to the 1800s, before there was an income tax. We used to have tax assessors come up and say, this is how much we'd like you to pay for your taxes. Well, we have an income tax now. It's a more equitable way of funding it. And lastly, it's a stimulus plan. It puts money back into your pockets. I think you can spend your money better than the government, and I want you to make that determination on where you want to spend your money. This is a better, more equitable way by broadening our tax base in order to fund our education system.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy?
I absolutely support the notion that we rely far too heavily on property taxes to fund our schools. And there have been many bills over the years. The bill that my opponent is referencing is not new this session. This bill has been introduced and reintroduced for many sessions. We need to switch from property to sales and income tax at the state level. Doing that has proven to be a problem. There are many different circumstances in many different communities in Pennsylvania that make it hard to get enough votes to pass that bill. And as he suggests, and as he says, 1776, the bill that he is proposing and supporting so heavily, leaves a $1.5 billion funding gap in our public schools. We just talked about how important the funding is for our public schools, for early childhood education, for tutoring after school for at-risk students, small class size in the early grades. We can't afford a $1.5 billion funding gap. So I look forward to the sponsors of the bill fixing that and telling us just what the personal income tax would need to be in order to fill that hole.
Thank you. Our next question is about casino revenues. We have heard that casino revenues would lower property taxes. What is currently being done with these revenues? Should there be changes to the use of casino monies? If so, what changes do you propose? Ms. Mundy?
If I had my druthers when we instituted the table games, we would have used all of that money for property tax relief. Unfortunately, in order to get the bill passed, the compromise was that the funding would go into the general fund to help solve some of our funding problems at that level. And certainly that did help keep our funding for public schools at a higher level than it would have been if we didn't have it. However, The reason we went to gaming in the first place was because we were unable to come up with a switch from property to sales and income at the state level. The tax votes were not there to do that, and so gaming became the way to help create a fund to lower property taxes. In the end, in order to get that bill passed, the slots bill, the casinos bill, we had to give money to some of the interests who saw that big pot of money sitting there and wanted part of it. So some of it goes to horse racing development fund, some of it goes to economic development, some of it goes to the host municipalities. But the state tax on gaming is 34% on the slots. And as I said, if I ruled the world, I would take all of the table games money and put it into the property tax relief fund.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
Well, that isn't what happened. And I think that's what we care about, what the results are. We were promised property tax relief. Has anybody seen it? $60, I've heard in some places. And this program went on to be called mildly successful, I think was your words of it. I would not call that program mildly successful. What it's become is its own separate grant system. It's become our own walking around money newly for our legislators. It's become another way to encourage their pet projects to send money out to these towns where they'd like to get extra votes. And to me, it's irresponsible the way we're going about it. It should be back in your pockets like we were promised. Governor Rendell signed that bill in Nanacoke. And when he sat in front of that woman's table, he said that we are going to reduce, we will eliminate or near eliminate the woman's property taxes who is sitting there. Well, it's a lie, and we've seen it. And I can't go on listening to lies without having my own questions brought up about them.
Thank you. Next question. Are there sufficient safeguards in place to protect our environment from Marcellus shale drilling? If not, what laws should be passed? Mr. Kaufer?
With the Marcellus shale, we have a real opportunity, but we're not doing things the right way right now. My mother's family is from the Dimmock area, town right next door to where, in the town right next door to where this issue blew up. We can send a man to the moon. We can have a man fall 24 miles to the earth safely. We can safely prosper from the natural gas below our feet. But are we doing things the right way right now? I don't think so. Representative Mundy and I are both big proponents of a severance tax. And one of the things that's most important to me is that we safely manage the risk by putting some of this money into independent testing. There's basically none right now. And we've heard a loud voice on this from our area, but no results. And so I'd like to see some of this go back. We do need we need stricter regulations done through our state. I'd like to see some of this severance tax money go to emergency and disaster relief, to infrastructure repair, early childhood initiatives, and renewable energy. These are some of the places that we can talk about. Our Marcellus shale and gas drilling right now is in its infancy stage. If you're upset about the price at the pump, in the next 5 years, imagine filling your car up for pennies from natural gas. You want to talk about getting our economy back on track? This is an opportunity, but we have to make sure we're doing it the right way, and we do need some more specification, more laws about this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy?
The reason that we don't have a severance tax and the reason that we haven't enacted environmental protections adequate to the task is because we elected a governor who does not support those things, and we have a Republican majority in the House and Senate who also do not support those things. Look at the vote on Act 13 of 2012. It is very clear. My opponent wants to join that majority. Is he going to be the only one over there who votes to do those things? We do need a severance tax. We need to be able to put aside enough money to protect our environment, to not live the past as we knew it from the coal industry. We have to learn from the mistake of not asking the coal industry to pay their fair share toward environmental protection and cleanup. I have introduced bills to prohibit drilling in a floodplain, to protect our water supply in the Huntsville and Seastown reservoirs, and those bills need to move forward. I can tell you that if the Democrats get back in the majority in the House this session, that is the first issue we will take up. We will pass a severance tax. We will enact adequate environmental protections. We'll send them to the Senate, and then we will beat on the Senate until they do what the people of Pennsylvania need done.
Thank you. Next, I'm sorry, please hold your applause till the end. Next question is a related question. UGI Energy Services is proposing to construct a gas compressor station in a residential area in West Wyoming Borough. Luzerne County has denied a special exemption permit for the project, and UGI is appealing the decision. What action would you or did you take with regard to this gas compressor station? Ms. Mundy?
When I learned of UGI's proposal, I immediately went to the Luzerne County Zoning Hearing Board and asked that a public hearing be held to give my citizens a voice in the location of that facility. When that hearing took place, I opposed the the compressor station because I have grave concern about the air quality issue with regard to gas compressor stations, and because UGI was either unable or unwilling to tell me how they would get the pipeline from that compressor station in West Wyoming across the river to Saylor Avenue. I also went to DEP because UGI needs an air quality permit if and when the zoning variance is ever granted. And I was assured that the DEP would hold a public hearing in my district before that permit was issued. We need to follow that issue. We need to be diligent in following up to make sure that the best possible technology is used if that compressor station is built.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
There needs to be more done on our state level. And as I mentioned before, we've had a loud voice, but little results. The regulations that we're talking about should be done on a state level to be fair and done fairly throughout the entire district, throughout the entire state, excuse me. And this issue is one that UGI is proposing a new state-of-the-art facility that has never been built before. We've heard a lot on both sides about this issue, but we haven't actually sat down and had a real discussion about what the air quality would be, about the specifics, because the numbers that have been used have been based on their old facilities. So when we get forward about talking about this, know that this is something new that we're talking about. And it makes me question it going into a residential area. It's scary. I don't like being the guinea pig for anything in this area. So let's talk about real solutions, and I think it can be done through our state so that it's done fairly throughout the entire state.
Thank you. Also regarding Marcellus Shale, how does Pennsylvania compare to Oklahoma and Texas and Louisiana in handling the gas companies? Mr. Kaufer?
Yeah, we are the only state that does not have an extraction tax. That is why I'm a big proponent of a severance tax and would be happy to be the only Republican to vote for it. But the problem is we don't have enough bipartisan legislation right now. One of the big problems we have is that we have a closed-door party caucus system in our state, where Democrats sit on one side, Republicans are on the other, and lobbyists come in and write our bills. I think that's wrong. I think we as the public should see the bills that are being written. We should know what's going into our bills, and they're not right now. So able to work bipartisanly on the floor of the House, we can work as Democrats and Republicans alike. We don't need to be separated like school children. Running for the 120th district, I'd like to sit next to representatives of the 119th and 121st. I don't care if they're Republicans, I don't care if they're Democrats. It's time to sit down and get something done, because we aren't right now, and we have reached a partisan gridlock. And Representative Mundy talked about what would happen if that bill got passed. It would get stuck in our Senate, and I'm afraid to say that. But that's why we need to get out of this caucus system. Let's get people talking, because they're not right now. We need a full and honest debate about the issues from both sides. We can't close ourselves off to debate. That's what we're doing here tonight. That's why we're having this forum, so we can talk about these issues.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy.
Would you repeat the question?
Yes. Regarding Marcellus Shale, how does Pennsylvania compare to Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana in handling the gas companies?
Well, I'm not sure what their regulatory environment is, but I do know that my opponent is correct. Every natural gas producing state has an extraction tax to benefit all of the citizens of their state. Look at Alaska. Alaska's citizens get actual checks from the oil and gas industry because they had the wisdom to enact extraction taxes. These people are using our natural resources, and they should be putting money aside to pay for any environmental damage, any environmental cleanup, any infrastructure damage, our roads and bridges, and they aren't. And the reason they aren't is because we have a governor and a legislature who does not support a severance tax. We do need to come together and work together. The Democrats have been shut out since we went into the minority. We always tried to work with the Republicans when we were in the majority. That is no longer the case. We are at an ideological divide, very polarized in our views. But I feel very strongly that we need to enact a severance tax and strong environmental protections for our water, our land, our air, and our property values.
Thank you. Do you believe there is a problem with the state employee pension system? If so, what is the solution? Ms. Mundy.
Well, there is a problem. How did we get here? The economy collapsed, and the returns on our investment in our retirement systems went south. For 8 years at least, and probably more like 12 years, we did not properly fund our pension system. And in, I forget what year it was, we raised the multiplier. There was a pension vote under Governor Ridge. There was a pension vote, and we raised the multiplier, which added to the problem. Now, I voted against the pension increase. Not that you'd know that by listening to my opponent's attack ads. But the fact is that we do have a pension problem. We have already enacted several fixes to our current situation, and we've made many changes for new employees. We've lowered the multiplier by 20%. We've increased the vesting requirement from 5 to 10 years. We placed a cap on the maximum pension benefit. We substantially increased the age and years of service required to retire at full benefit. We don't allow members to withdraw their contributions when they retire anymore. So we have made changes for new hires.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
I'll set the record straight. Representative Mundy, I know you voted against the bill in 2001, but just days later, you went and signed up and accepted a 50% increase, just days after voting against the bill. That's not good leadership. It's failed leadership and a lack of leadership. It's part of the problem that we have. It's the typical political hypocrisies we have from career politicians. We are working on addressing this issue, and I'm glad that it's finally coming about. I talked about it before, that there's a bill put forward to stop putting Band-Aids over a problem that needs stitches. We're going to bleed out if we don't get our stitches. And so that's why Representative Warren Camp has put forward a bill that would switch over from a defined benefit to a defined contribution and give people the option of switching by increasing the employer contribution from 4% to 7%. You can make up your own mind if you're in this system. For anybody new joining it, they will be in a defined contribution plan. I think this is a way about going about it to create long-term solutions and not just push these problems off. We don't need more political hypocrisy in our state. We have enough.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufer. I would ask that both candidates do address the questions and how they would solve these issues that we're talking about. I'll just remind the candidates that. Next question, should Pennsylvania establish a health care exchange as required by the Affordable Care Act? Why or why not? Mr. Kaufer?
Healthcare is a huge issue we have in this state, and the way that our state deals with it is very important. A long time ago, I actually was a guest page for Representative Mundy, and we got to talk about medical malpractice at the issue at that time. We talked about the high costs for doctors to practice here in Pennsylvania because we have a doctor shortage and one of the oldest populations here in this state. Our doctors have to perform defensive medicine because of successive medical malpractice cases. Where in some cases in other states that capped medical malpractice on pain and suffering, like in California and Texas, two very different politically minded states, healthcare costs plummeted. Now, my brother's a doctor. He's in the audience here tonight. And we need to make sure that we keep the doctors here. My brother's a doctor in Philadelphia. He's just finishing up his fellowship. He's trying to determine whether he wants to practice here in Pennsylvania or be somewhere else and make more money. It's a critical decision that we need to take on as Pennsylvanians. And if we're going to be serious about lowering the cost of our health care and making sure we have affordable health care, we need to make sure we keep our doctors here. And that's at the heart of this issue.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Should Pennsylvania establish a health care exchange as required by the Affordable Care Act? Why or why not?
We should. And House Democrats have been working by introducing legislation to implement the Affordable Care Act and the policy changes that the federal government requires of us. But we've been stymied by the majority party. If Pennsylvania does not implement these policies via legislation or regulation, then the federal government will step in and regulate our market. Our residents will be forced to turn to bureaucrats in Washington for help, and our insurers will be doubly regulated by both the state and the federal government. Pennsylvania needs its own insurance exchange, and we need to get busy on it right away.
Thank you. If we eliminate property tax, what safeguards will be in place for municipalities who count on commercial properties to help fund many of their services? Ms. Mundy?
That's a very good question, and one that needs to be addressed. Basically, a lot of the property tax bills, House Bill 1776, really only deals with school taxes. It does not deal with municipal taxes. And school taxes are by far a worse problem than municipal taxes with regard to property. So I don't think that we can do both at the same time. As I said, there's a $1.5 billion, perhaps as much as $3.5 billion gap in House Bill 1776, depending on whether you listen to the Department of Revenue or the Independent Fiscal Office. So we have a gap to fill there, let alone at the municipal level. However, I believe that any property tax reduction should be funded through the homestead exemption. And that would mean that commercial and industrial properties would continue to pay a share of school and municipal taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
I agree with Representative Mundy that we should focus on one of these issues at a time. And the more pressing one is our school property taxes. There's no doubt about it. I talked to the 96-year-old woman in Swoyersville who has to move out of her house at the age of 96 after living there and owning her house for 65 years because of school property taxes. She's living on Social Security, and as her property taxes go up, her Social Security isn't. And so we have a serious issue here. And it's an issue that it comes down to, what are you willing to do about it? What are you willing to stand up and do about it? It's very important. I received a letter from a friend who's very passionate about this issue, who's forwarded on remarks made by Representative Mundy that said, I will vote in favor of House Bill 1776 as soon as the Republicans, who are in the majority and control the voting calendar, bring the bill before me for a vote. I don't think that's acceptable. I will work to bring that bill to the floor of this. I will not sit and wait for the bill to be brought to me. That's a difference. Complacency kills, and that's what's happening in our legislature. We don't have legislators willing to reach across the aisle. I am willing to reach across the aisle and get something done for the better of this district.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufer. I would ask again that the audience please hold their applause till the end of the debate. I know we have applause, one each for both candidates, but thank you for keeping that equal. Next question. What is your stance on Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board's privatization? Mr. Kaufer.
This is an issue about liberty. We are only one of 2 states that actually have public control of liquor sales. And there's here so often about the idea of jobs with this, about we're cutting jobs. Well, according to the theory of capitalism, competition creates more jobs. And so that's what we should be trying to do here. We have a huge pension crisis. We talked about it, both of us already. A $65 billion crisis, more than twice our state budget. Our state budget is $27 billion. We can help cut some of the overhead, and we can reduce our public pension obligations by moving to privatizing our liquor stores. Some of the money that we'd still be collecting revenues, because there was a recent study that said that we aren't receiving as much revenues as it was originally projected. So we can be collecting money from both alcohol tax and licensing fees by cutting some of the overhead and moving to privatize. It's a fairer system that will create more jobs and be better for our community. We can do this, and it's just some of the more outdated thinking that we have. One of only 2 states. This is liberty. Let's get back to it.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy?
I support modernizing our liquor system. I think there are a lot of things that we can do to modernize and make alcohol more affordable, which is, depending on how you look at it, a good or a bad thing, and more convenient to buy. There are bills that have been introduced to modernize our liquor system. It's very difficult to give up $500 million in pure profit every year for our general fund.
Thank you. How can we fix the renewable energy portfolio standard? Ms. Mundy.
Well, Governor Rendell had gone a long way toward instituting green energy, wind and solar. My friend Bob McDonald, who works in that field, is sitting in the audience today. And he's been telling me how he's been forced to move to New Jersey because we've dropped the ball on green energy. We no longer lead the nation in solar and wind production. That's a shame. We absolutely need to get back to green energy production and research. We need to make it more affordable. Natural gas is a cleaner fuel than coal, and it's getting far too much attention and play in Pennsylvania. We need to go back to a progressive approach to wind and solar.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
I support an all-of-the-above approach. And the best way of doing that is by helping to reinvest in some of these places, something that I agree with Representative Mundy on, except I'm putting forward a plan on how we're going to reinvest in them. I've mentioned about a severance tax, and something that can be done by working bipartisanly to get things done. I'd like to see some of the severance tax money go into renewable energy, a place that I've heard similar stories, not from Mr. McDonald, but from other people who are inside this field. And it's an issue that we can modernize. The natural gas here, you hear it's going to be here for 100 years. You heard recently that we might have more energy than that. So if we're going to take that next step forward, we have to make sure that we're not just here 100 years from now, but 200 and 300 years from now. And so by reinvesting in renewable energy, we can take that step forward as a state so that we do have long-term solutions here. And that's part of what my PA First plan is. That's why I put it forward. It's my contract with you, the voters. And if you haven't seen it yet, they'll be out there as you're leaving tonight. Pick one up, read it, see if you agree with it. Those are issues that I got from you by going door to door, talking with 15,000 voters at their door. These are your ideas. Don't you want somebody to represent your ideas? That's why I put this plan forward, and that's what I'm going to be fighting for. And I hope that everybody will have a chance to read that plan and seriously consider it for the best to put PA first.
Thank you. With all the recent cuts to our state and federal budgets, how would you advocate for and provide sufficient funding for the much-needed infrastructure maintenance and repair? Mr. Kaufer?
More than 40% of our roads and bridges are either structurally obsolete or shouldn't be traveled on. This is an issue that's been building for years. In 1998, we actually had the same percentage, actually slightly more since then, but roughly the same, of roads and bridges that are in disrepair. I don't want to prolong this issue, so I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I'd address this. Public-private partnerships, one of the ways that we can help lower the costs and have better roads out there. We talked about liquor store privatization already. If we use some of this money from the alcohol tax and licensing fees, which we still have coming in, and which would be pure profit, we can put this money into our roads and bridges. Lastly, once again, I talked about in my severance tax plan, I want to put some of that money towards infrastructure repair, making sure that we have the best roads and bridges in the state. And right now, we don't. We have some of the worst. So next time you're traveling over a road or a bridge, flip a coin and let me know if you feel safe, because that's what's going on. That's what's been going on for the last 14 years.
Ms. Mundy?
We absolutely do need to invest in our infrastructure, and we tried an approach by tolling Route 80 and increasing turnpike fees and using that money to fund roads and bridge maintenance and repair. Unfortunately, the federal government rejected our proposal, but we took that approach because we couldn't get a good infrastructure bill through the Republican Senate. Governor Rendell in the House majority, when the Democrats were in the majority, tried very hard to address our infrastructure problem. We really have never had an increase in revenue for roads and bridges without the leadership of the governor. The governor needs to step up, reject his Grover Norquist Americans for Tax Reform no tax increase pledge, and do what's right for the people of Pennsylvania, because our infrastructure is not only a job creator, but it's vital to our businesses getting their goods to market. We absolutely need to address it, and I'm truly hoping that Governor Corbett will finally step up to the plate.
Thank you. Do you favor a ban on assault weapons? Ms. Mundy?
I do. I have always supported the rights of sportsmen and hunters to use weapons, to own them and to use them. I do, however, believe that it is reasonable to limit access to assault weapons and try to prevent straw purchasers from legally buying weapons and selling them to criminals. And I feel very strongly about that issue. Gun violence in our communities is on the increase. There are too many guns, too easily available to the mentally ill. We need to address some of these issues. You shouldn't be able to walk into a movie theater and open fire with multiple rounds of ammunition.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
I support current gun laws, and I heard a lot of the problems, but not many of the solutions in what was just addressed. We can talk about there being problems and saying that people shouldn't fire and well, no, I absolutely, everybody agrees with this in this hall. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't agree with that. It's about how we go about doing it, making sure that we do it responsibly. I think the right to keep and defend arms is one of our sacred rights, actually. Being Jewish, I look at the issue that if people in the Holocaust had weapons, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened. People would have been able to stand up and defend themselves. So I get really scared when we start talking about people not having the right to have weapons to defend themselves. It's an issue that's near and dear to the heart, near and dear to my ethnicity, and near and dear to our state and protecting our rights as citizens.
Thank you. Though the state court has ordered a new voter ID law postponed until after the November elections, this law is still a very real possibility. Where do you stand on this law, Mr. Kaufer?
I think the voter ID law that we tried putting forward was bad policy. We tried to kick something in over the course of 6 months that usually takes 12 months or 18 months at the bare minimum to do. I think it had political motivations, and I think we saw some of that. And our right to vote and having fair and honest elections is the bedrock principle of our country, and of our state for that matter. So I get very leery when we hear about people having to present an ID. Do I think there could be a check of some sort? Sure, I think that's doable, whether somebody has to give the last 4 numbers of their social security number or something along those lines when they're actually at the voting booth. But I think the way that this policy was put forward, I think it was bad policy. We can go about it a better way.
Thank you. Ms. Mundy?
A horrendous waste of millions of dollars that we desperately need for public education and other services that are vital to the people I represent. People should not have to jump through hoops to solve a problem that does not exist. Voter impersonation does not exist. In court, the governor couldn't find a single case of voter impersonation. That is the only issue that this bill addressed. It doesn't address absentee ballot fraud. It doesn't address voter registration fraud. It only addresses the issue of somebody showing up at a polling place and not being who they say they are. Now, it's being portrayed as stopping illegal immigrants from voting. Please tell me what illegal immigrant is going to put him or herself forward at a polling place. They're busy trying to hide from the authorities. They're not putting themselves forward trying to vote. And the amount of money that was wasted on this bill and on its implementation is just, it's horrendous.
Thank you. What are your thoughts on regionalization of the police, fire, and the like? Ms. Mundy.
We encourage regionalization and for municipalities to work together in police and fire departments, and frankly, every other way. Actually, there's a COG being formed in the Wyoming area that hopefully will spread to other parts of my district. And through our grants and the Commonwealth Financing Authority, we try to encourage regionalism and municipal cooperation. You're much more likely to get a grant approved if you do engage in those activities. So I don't believe that you can force those issues at the local level. We are a commonwealth, a group of local municipalities who band together, but we certainly can encourage municipal cooperation and cost savings through regionalism.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufer?
I think regionalization is a great idea for our area. We hear so much about globalization, which is happening on a nation-to-nation basis, and this is what we can be doing in our regional area to make better services. One of the big ones that's going on right now is between the Kingston and 40 Fort fire departments. And what we've done is help combine into one building so that we have better response time. We're not wasting resources. We're making sure that people are out there in less than 5 minutes. They can actually respond to anywhere in Kingston or 40 Fort. I feel pretty good about that, being a Kingston resident. And I can tell you, I'm pretty sure people in 40 Fort feel pretty good about that as well. If we're going to take that next step forward, you know, I agree with you. We can't force the issue to happen, but we can incentivize it. We can offer grants. We hear about development grants. We can use some of these to help encourage regionalization in our area, to make sure that every town can have the appropriate resources that they need. I know that Kingston and Pringle actually have started using police forces together so that Kingston would actually cover part of Pringle, lowering the cost burden and providing better services for both communities. So this is an issue that we need to work on. It's an issue that's going to be going forward because this issue is the future of this area.
Thank you. This next question is about House Bill 2224. The Donated and Dedicated Property Act guarantees that any attempt to sell public parks, open space, recreation land, hunting and fishing areas, and conservation easements, as well as buildings owned by the public, must be reviewed by the orphans courts, acting as overseers of the trustees. These court proceedings allow the Attorney General to oppose such sales in the orphans court in the county where the lands are situated, acting on behalf of the taxpayers or owners of the land. House Bill 2224 proposes to remove everything I just said. Please explain your position regarding this bill. Mr. Kaufer?
Well, this is an issue that I haven't reviewed before, so to speak about this issue would be irresponsible. This is the first time I'm hearing about this bill, so to speak about the specifics of this bill, like I said, would be irresponsible on my behalf.
Okay.
I couldn't give more specifics on it because it's something that I do not know the pros and cons about each. And like I said, this is a question about a specific bill that I have never reviewed before. But when we talk about writing bills, we should always look to see if it's done bipartisanly, making sure it's not done by one side or the other, the costs and benefits of the two. And like I said, this is not a specific bill that I am formally acquainted with, and something that I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking about.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Mundy?
I honestly don't remember all the details about that particular bill, but I can speak to the issue of our public parks and our public lands. The Corbett administration has turned its back on our public lands. They encourage timbering, mining, and gas extraction in areas that should be preserved for ourselves and future generations for recreation and open space. Everything shouldn't be for sale. Sometimes you need to step back and do what's right for the people in the long run. There are plenty of oil and gas leases available under current law. We do not need to go into Francis Slocum State Park to drill. We do not need to go into our hardwood forest to timber. We need to preserve our parks and our open spaces for future generations.
Thank you. And our final question this evening, and thank you so much, audience, for all these questions. They were wonderful. I'm sorry we were unable to ask all of them. Last question is from the audience, as over half of these were. What experience makes you uniquely qualified to represent the citizens of the 120th Legislative District, and what will be your highest priority for the next fiscal year if you are elected? Ms. Mundy?
I'm a mother and a grandmother. I've worked at several jobs and at least 2 careers, but for the 10 years before I was elected, I managed a local manufacturing company. At the same time, I was a very active community volunteer with the League of Women Voters and the Junior League and other organizations. Over the 22 years I've been in office, I have gained a wealth of knowledge, experience, and seniority. My district office staff and I have worked very hard to meet the needs of the many constituents who come to us for help. I've worked towards solutions and studied each issue that comes before me by listening to all sides and then taking a reasonable, common sense approach. Always, I've tried to act in the best interest of the hardworking middle-class people I represent. I have represented the people with honesty and integrity. I've been straightforward about my positions. I do not tell half-truths and misrepresent the facts to my constituents. I believe I am very well qualified to serve you.
Thank you. And Mr. Kaufer, what experience makes you uniquely qualified to represent these citizens of the 120th? And what's your highest priority for the next year if you're elected?
3 words: energy, passion, and independence. Energy. I've knocked on 15,000 doors. I've been in knocking doors in every single town of our district, including every single house in 7 of the 13 towns that the 120th District represents. Passion. My experience is that I've talked to the people and laid out a specific plan to get something done. My background is in U.S.-Chinese economics and global economics, specifically outlining a plan on how we can compete with outsourcing, to compete with China, put forward real solutions here in northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm upset that we haven't had more time to talk about specific job plans, considering I think that's one of the most important issues here. But for my public service, I was awarded the Best and Brightest in the Times Leader. The headline was "A Passion for Politics." Independence. You know, you hear so often about rebellious young people. Well, I'm rebellious against our system. Make no doubt about it, our system's broken and it's not going to fix itself. So what we need right now, we don't need the same stale thinking. We need fresh ideas. Don't need old politicians. We need new leaders. That's why I'm running. That's why I'm asking for your support and your vote, because I'm putting forward the new ideas that this district needs and how we're going to take that next step forward.
Thank you to both candidates. Our candidates will offer their closing statements in just a moment. As soon as I inform you, tonight's debate will be rebroadcast tomorrow night, October 24th, on Service Electric Cable, Channel 19, and live streamed at videoinnovations.com at 8 p.m. For our closing statement, Ms. Mundy will go first.
Again, I want to thank the League of Women Voters and Wyoming Seminary for this forum tonight. The voters have a very clear choice in this election. A vote for my opponent is a vote for Governor Corbett's continued cuts to higher education, public education, and for his failed economic policies. Policies that favor the largest, wealthiest corporations at the expense of the average taxpayer and small business. I'm proud of my record of care and concern for the hardworking middle-class people of this district. I stood up to Blue Cross as they hoarded a huge surplus and raised your health care premiums. I always stand up to the utility companies as they seek exorbitant rate increases. I'm standing up to the oil and gas industry to protect our environment, water supply, and to ask them to pay their fair share. And I stand up to Governor Corbett and the current majority, who believe that by giving huge tax breaks to the wealthiest corporations, not even tied to job creation, that somehow this will grow the middle class and grow our economy. That by allowing them to avoid paying their fair share through the Delaware loophole and other accounting schemes, by cutting basic and higher education and early childhood education, by allowing our infrastructure to crumble, that we are somehow benefiting the average citizen and small business. Yes, my friends, your choice is clear. I have worked very hard. I've done my best to serve you well. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th.
Thank you, Ms. Mundy. Mr. Kaufer, your closing statement?
Thank you. I also would like to thank the League of Women Voters. Thank you to Wyoming Seminary. Thank you, Representative Mundy. And thank you once again. Throughout this debate, we missed one big issue, and I don't know how we missed it, but we haven't talked about jobs. We haven't talked about long-term solutions on how we're going to get jobs here. We sat here for an hour and didn't talk about the most important thing affecting this area. We have the highest unemployment rate in any of the major labor markets right here in northeastern Pennsylvania, in the 120th District. To me, that's not acceptable. That's why I put forward a plan. I'm going to talk about it with you for a quick minute, and I ask you that if you want to hear more about it, to join me after this. But I'm putting forward a plan because we have the highest taxes on mature business. We're the worst. So I put forward a capital investment tax credit to help mature businesses grow through employment. For the exception of one state, we're the worst when it comes to taxing new business. So instead of doing this outdated KOZ program for the Keystone Opportunity Zones, we should move into temporary tax credits for companies that would reduce their corporate tax rate over 5 years, as long as they're willing to stay here an additional 5 years when the benefits end. And lastly, when it comes to competing in a global economy, we're not. We need long-term investment tax credits like what the P&G plant is doing in Mahoopany. They're using the cheap energy below our feet in northeastern Pennsylvania to compete with the cheap labor overseas in China. This is the type of innovation we need in our state, and that's the type of innovation you'll get from me if you elect me as your next state representative. Thank you.
Thank you to both candidates again. Thank you again, Wyoming Seminary, our worker in the sound booth, and everyone who came tonight. If you'd like to be a part of the League of Women Voters Wilkes-Barre, there are membership forms out front. Our next event is a legislative breakfast in January, and look for our voters guide in both the Citizen's Voice and the Times Leader on Monday, November 5th. A last reminder that tonight's debate will be rebroadcast tomorrow night, October 24th, on Service Electric Cable Channel 19 and live streamed at videoinnovations.com at 8 p.m. Thanks, everybody.